Hey, what's up everybody? Gene Fetty with the Automotive Appearance Institute here today for Blackplague PDR. First off, congratulations on your new tool. You got a new Shrinky Box, that's why you're here. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to set up and use your SB4. We're gonna go over all of the parts and accessories. I'm gonna give you the 5 tips for successful dent shrinking with a Shrinky Box. I'm also gonna show you how to protect the vehicle you're working on from electrical damage. And I'm going to show you how to reapply the coating to the backside of the panel to restore it to that like new finish. Let's dive in. All right, so here we have your SB4 kit. Let's talk about what we've got going on. We have your storage box, of course, the Shrinky Box itself. Notice that it has 3 cables coming out of it. Those are all permanently attached. Your grounding clamp, 2 different types of rods, a couple of different adapters, and your brass brushes for removing the paint off the backside of the panel. All right, so let's dive right in and talk about your SB4. The first thing you probably noticed is there is not an on and off switch. Once you plug this in, it is on, but don't worry, as long as you don't hit the button on the wand, there's no current running through the machine. Now on the front of the machine, you've got 3 buttons. The top left is a time/power mode. What that means is you're going to be able to switch between time mode and power mode. Now the time mode is okay when you're practicing. That's what comes on by default. That is known as mode 1. That takes you from a current cycle, like current coming out of the gun, for 1/100th of a second up to 1 full complete second. Again, that's okay when you're testing, when you're learning. I prefer to work in power mode. So hit that power mode button and that will switch you to mode 2. By default, when you turn it on, it should be at 20%. That is the lowest power setting. It goes from 20 all the way up to 99% by single clicks. So use the up and down button to increase percentage up and or down. That means when you hit the button, it is running that much power, 20% to 99%. Through the wand. Always start low and work your way up. All right, so coming out of the front of the box on the right-hand side is your ground cable. Right out of the box, you'll be set up with the magnet and copper grounding pin. That is great for steel. So you clean off the backside of the panel, attach your magnet, and you can adjust the pin up and down to make sure you're making good contact. If you are on aluminum, and you can't obviously ground with a magnet, Keith has included a grounding clamp. So to use that, unbolt the entire magnet setup from the cable and bolt your clamp directly to the cable. There you can grind down on the edge of a brace and get a ground on aluminum panels without having to use a magnet and go through the panel. All right, on the left side of your SB4 is the magic wand that actually runs current through. The first thing to take notice on this is on the top of the handle is the small round button. That's a momentary switch, which means as long as you hold it in when you're in power mode, it is running current. As soon as you let go of the switch, current stops. So it's a great way to reach in and get where you need to be, and you're not running current until you're ready to go. Moving up from there, the copper on the front end with the wing nut, that is where you're going to insert either your rod or your rod adapter and use the set screw to lock it in place. Be careful to not over tighten the wing nut. You don't want to crush or dent either the rod or the adapter. Now let's talk about the rods, your electrodes that are going to let you run current through the panel. The ones you're going to use most of the time are the thicker carbon rods. Now, these are brittle, don't drop them, but these are going to give you your cleanest shrink. They won't stick to the backside of the panel as long as you're clean, but they're thick and can be difficult to get into tight places. So these are great. These are what you want to use most of the time when you're shrinking, certainly out in the open. If you break one off, you can clean the copper outer coating off and get down to new carbon and continue to use it. I've never actually worn one of these out in all the years I've been using Shrinky Boxes. All right, a great addition to the SB4 is the introduction of these copper rods. Now, these Be careful when you're using them. They are not as slick as the carbon rods. They can stick to the backside of the panel, so tread lightly. I like to generally tap more than slide when I'm using a carbon rod. When you use these, or where to use these, is to sneak up like into a brace on underneath the hood, underneath the panel. You can bend them; they're bendable to sneak around areas. I've also taken and hammer and dollied the ends a little bit to flatten them out to actually sneak in the sides of braces. When you are using these, you want to use one of the included white insulating sleeves so it is not arcing off of other parts of the panel. And also note that one is threaded and one is not. The one that is threaded is actually for attaching to your adapter that will hold a piece of the carbon rod. You can use that when you need to like maybe get in a quarter panel and bend around a corner. You can bend the copper rod, but still keep a little piece of carbon in the end and do your shrinking with the carbon to make that a safer, smoother shrinking process. So those are your two copper rods and when to use them. All right, so let's talk adapters. The first one I want to talk about is the small copper to carbon adapter. This is the smaller of the two. You'll notice one end is wider. That is for putting a piece of a carbon rod in. The other side is small and tapped with threads to thread onto your threaded copper rod to allow you to gain access into tighter areas or bent areas with still having a carbon tip. All right, so your larger of the two adapters is for switching your wand from a carbon insert to the copper insert. Simply drop this into your wand, tighten the wing nut on the wand up, just snug it, don't dent it. And on this end, you can insert your copper rod right in, and again, just snug it in there with the wing nut. Now that is electrified and ready to go. Don't forget to put that insulating sleeve over the copper rod so you don't arc off of anything. All right, last but certainly not least, included in the kit is your assortment of brass wire wheel brushes. These are simply for removing paint or finishes off the backside of your panel. Sort of self-explanatory, but use the size and shape that makes the most sense for you to get to a clean area. Side note, clean a little bigger than you think you need and make sure you're not leaving any paint residue inside. That will help you get better, faster, cleaner, safer shrinks. To recap, going clockwise, starting with your storage box. We've got your storage box, 2 carbon rods, 2 copper rods, 1 threaded, 1 not, 2 insulating sleeves so those don't arc off of anything. Your SB4 with its 3 wires, the wand with the button, the grounding cable, and of course the plug. Don't forget about that grounding clamp for when you are working on aluminum. 2 adapters. The small one is your copper to carbon. The big one is Shrinky Box to copper, and your 5 brass wire wheels for removing the finish off the backside of the panel. All right, guys, so let's dive in. Let's shrink a dent. We've got our sample hood here, and I've got a oil canner right here. We all know that that is the last sound you want to hear when you're fixing a dent, but in reality, that's what happens, and that's what the Shrinky Box is here to save. So let's get this thing flipped over and get her sanded down and ready to go. All right, guys, so included in your kit are a selection of brass wire brushes. That's for removing the paint off the back of the panel. So our dent is right here. I'm gonna go ahead and take this and sand this down, and then I'm gonna hop over and sand in here to give us a nice clean spot for our ground. So let's get after it. All right, guys, so that's what you wanna do. Sand that down to bare metal. One of the biggest things I've found that creates problems is leaving a little bit of paint or e-coat residue behind. I clean a little bigger than I need, and I make sure it's a nice, clean, smooth surface. Let's flip this thing over and get that Shrinky Box going. All right, guys, so our first step was to get down to that bare metal. The next step is we need to be able to attach our ground to bare metal. One of the things that sets the SB4 apart from other brands is the grounding system. So first, you've got a magnetic ground with a copper pin for adjustability. You can get a great ground there. If you're working on an aluminum panel, all you need to do is loosen this top nut up like so, spin this off. And what we want to get down to is just the ground wire. If we're working on aluminum, we can actually switch to our clamp ground, right? Wire directly to there. Spin this on. And then if you're on aluminum, you could actually grind a little bit of the paint off of one of the braces and clamp this right to your brace to get your ground. That avoids having to magnetize something to the back side of the panel or through the panel with your other ground. So that is how you switch grounds. On this one, it's steel. So we're gonna go with this and we're gonna switch to under the panel so I can show you exactly how we set that on there. All right, so you're looking here at the underside of the panel. This is where we ground down. What we wanna do is come in, let that magnet bite. We just wanna make sure we're pretty straight, and most important that this copper pin is making contact with the bare metal right there and your ground is set up. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled how-to video, but we've had some questions come in about some difficulties in grounding. Now I just showed you how it comes out of the box, but if you are having difficulties in getting this copper pin to make a good ground, I want to show you the simple fix. So all we need to do is, and you may need a tool, remove the cable from the grounding block, just like we're getting ready to set up that clamp. Then grab your magnet, loosen it here, set that down there, set these aside. You want to keep the bolt separate, bolt through the cable, put your nuts and washers, aka spacers, on here, thread the magnet back into place, like so. Make sure you snug that up really good. You don't want that to come loose. And now you're able to use just this magnet ring as your ground. So bare metal, clamp that bad boy on there, and you are good to go. Now, back to your regularly scheduled how-to video. All right, guys, so we've got our bare metal, we've got our ground placed. Now it's time to come in with a rod. We've got a couple of options. So we have our graphite rod, which is sort of like, call it the standard Shrinky Box rod. This is what we're going to use today. But before I install that, I want to talk about our copper rods. Now these are great if you need to get into a little tighter area. Maybe you're up near a brace. These are also bendable because they're just soft copper. So we can put a bend, we can sneak up into different areas. I have also taken these and put them on like a dolly and pounded them flat to get into some really tight spots. So these are great for that. If you do need to work into somewhere weird, but you still want that carbon tip, you can take the copper rod with the threaded end, the adapter with the threaded end, screw that together, and then you can actually insert a piece. You can chip off a piece of this, insert a piece of the graphite rod into there to sneak into or around strange places. If you're going to use the copper rods, you want to install one of these white insulating covers so you're not arcing off of anything. And caution, some of these ends and rods can get a little hot. Don't touch the bare metal. So let's get our graphite rod in here and get set up. All we want to do is insert and snug the set screw. Do not ever crank it. These things are actually kind of brittle. If you drop them, they will crack. Right? Just nice and snug. Now on here, we have got two different modes. The first mode is that time mode we mentioned in the beginning of the video. That's just for practicing. Once you're comfortable, you want to switch to power mode. And I like to always start at our lowest level of power. So on the SB4, that's 20%. Now this is dead. This won't hurt anything until we touch that button. Once we touch that button, we're running current through and we're getting to go. What you want to look for is not like you're trying to push a dent out, but when you're touching the back of the panel and you're hitting the button and getting juice, you'll be able to see this tip just like you were dragging a sharp tool behind there. You want it just enough current to leave the tiniest little high spot in the metal, and we're going to try to show you that on camera. So we're going to come in, and I'm just going to start touching the back of the panel and slowly increase my power. So again, we're at 20% right now. I'm going to sneak in here, sort of get a lay of the land looking underneath, right? It's going to be something like that. But notice, while I'm testing, I don't have any current going. Now I'm going to go to push the button and get power. And I don't even know if that's picking up any sound. Let's see. You can hear just a little bit of that current. That is not enough to move this metal. So we're going to go ahead and go up. Now, obviously, I practiced a little bit. I know we're over 30% to get movement here. So I'm going to come in, get my lay of the land. And what I'm doing is I'm sort of swirling around, looking for movement. I am not seeing anything yet, so that tells me to go up to more power. We go up 5%, I'm at 35%. I am just now, and I hope that you can see it zoomed in, just moving metal. So with the dent high, I've got separations. I've got low spots. I want to come in and hit those low spots. Now we have a couple of ways to do that. One approach is to tap. So I can hold my trigger on and come in and start tapping the panel, looking for where I'm at, and I'm basically trying to hop from low spot to low spot. I'm really not seeing well. I'm going to go up to 40%. See if we can see a little better on a tap. That's better. And I can watch and look for my lows, tap through. You also can just go pressure and then keep moving. You don't want to stay still, but I sort of just hop from place to place and work through. So what I'm going to do now is quickly go through all my lows, and hopefully you can see that tip moving on camera. We work that until it wants to stay high, and I got most of my lows out. So if I push, right, if we look back at the top of the panel, my oil can is not canning. It's time to grab your knockdown and start knocking down that crown and see what happens. Okay, so we've knocked down, and I noticed a couple of taps ago that I'm starting to get my oil can back. Remember before it wouldn't move? We simply come back in and repeat that process through these lows and pick them up. The lay of the land. So notice that I'm not staying in any one point too long or like really at all. And I'm just trying to pick up all of these little lows that I see. And now we should be back to a stiff panel. Go ahead and knock down again. Just a little bit of flop. I want to work through and take that out one last time, hopefully. Now we should be stiff again. Doesn't want to pop in. Go ahead and knock this down. One more round of shrinking. So what I'm doing here is when I get flop around the dent, this is part of why I go bigger than I need. I like to shrink around the outside of the impact to draw some of that metal up. And then we'll come back in and tap that down. And there we go. We've got this whole area stabilized now. To finish that off, come in with your tools, pick out what you want to pick out. Give it a little wet sand if you need a wet sand. If your flop comes back, just shrink a little bit more. But that's the process for shrinking out a dent like that. All right, so that is how you successfully shrink metal with a shrinky box like the SB4. So our first 4 steps were expose bare metal. We cleaned it up. Find a good ground on the same panel. That's very important. We grounded. We made sure our dent was high. Then we came in and corrected the lows. Once that was up and tight, we came in with a knockdown, and I think we did 4 or 5 rounds of that to get down to flat. Once you're down to flat, you would finish with your regular push tools. If that flop comes back, right, come back in with the SB4. Now we need to talk about recoating the backside or the E-coat of the panel. What I recommend is SEM's E-coat. It is a direct to metal product. I think I have maybe 10 different colors in the shop. Match the underside as best you can. I like to scuff around with a red scuff pad in the area that we're going to coat and then put a few good coats on and you're good. The big key is to put that E-coat back on, and then I always follow up that whole area with a good quality cavity wax like 3M. So that is your 5 steps to successfully shrinking metal with a shrinky box like the SB4. All right, so if you are going to be using the SB4 or any shrinky box, you need to be cautious of a couple of things. First, you need to make sure that your ground point is on the same panel that you're working on. Putting it on other parts of the car can actually run current through grounds around the rest of the car and create damage. So always ground to the panel you're working on. Number 2, also before you start, you should disconnect the battery to get rid of any power in that electrical system. This is a current repair. You're running current into the car. You should disconnect that. I personally like to use a 12-volt surge protector that mounts right to the battery that is also supposed to eat up any current running through the car. So ground to the same panel, disconnect the battery, surge protector, protect yourself, don't cause more damage trying to fix damage. All right, guys, I hope that helps you and sets you up for success with your SB4. If you have any questions about your product, you can reach the team at Blackplague at info@deadrattabs.com. Thanks for watching and good luck with your new tool.